All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Avraham Shaindy Kelman, dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos in memory of their parents. May the neshamas have an aliyah and the family a nechama. To thank our week of learning sponsor, Shmuel Shira Artman, for dedicating all of the shiurim this week in honor of the birth of a baby girl of Yakira Bela to Jesse and Rivkah Meyerowitz. May they be zoche, miras Hashem lekabel Torah lechuppah u'lemaisim tovim. And our day of learning sponsor, Zevi and Shoshy Daniel, l'schus Refuah Shelaima for Chaya Gittel bas Rochel Rivka and Refoel Yaakov ben Rochel Chava. And our Daf Yomi sponsors, a thank you to Milton Melanie Gertner for dedicating the shir today in the Succah of Refuah Shelaima for Shoshana Tova bas Mindel Leah. May she, together with Kol Choli Yisrael, have a complete and enduring refuah. And both with that, let us begin. Thank you for accommodating a little bit of the earlier start. Baruch Hashem, we have a lot to do today. An incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Lamed Dalid 34, but we are actually picking up on Lamed Gimel Amud Beis. We left off pretty much in the middle of Amud Beis, right by the two dots across Mitos's Tifshot. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says in Miyatan Kasha. Remember again, we're learning about the halachos of hadassim, and so remember the Mishnah taught us that if the hadas sprouts berries, if there is a berry proliferation, that could go ahead and invalidate the hadas. However, so we saw qualifications of that: blackberries, not green berries, where the berries have to be concentrated. But yet the Mishnah says something very interesting, which was that if you go ahead and remove the berries, then halacha l'maisa, the hadas could be kosher. To which the Gemara says, Dimatinu emas. When are you diminishing the berries? When is that occurring? If you say you remove the berries before you put the hadas in the bundle, so pshita. Then obviously the hadas will be kosher. What's the chiddush? What's the chiddush in telling me that if you remove the berries, the hadas is kosher? There's got to be some novelty to that ruling. So if you're taking away the berries before you put the hadas in the bundle, what's the chiddush? Elo lebasa de la agde. Rather, the chiddush must be that what? When are you removing the berries from the bundle? After you put the hadas in. When are you removing the berries from the hadas? After you put the hadas in the bundle. Oh, to which the Gemara says, Dichui meikarahu. Because remember at the point that hadas was put into the bundle, it was really unfit for use. Really unfit for use. So now what you're telling me is that something that was initially unfit for use could be rendered fit for use even once it's already in the bundle. Tiv shot mine dichui meikar lo havi dichui laolam. To which lo havi dichui. So what can you learn from here? Even something which was originally unfit, because that's the way we're setting up the case over here. At the time you put that hadas into the bundle, that hadas was unfit for use. So apparently what you're teaching me is that halacha l'maisa, something that was initially unfit does not have to retain its unfit status forever. To which the Gemara says maybe not. And I both say that this goes back to yesterday's daf about dichui meikara. Have dichui, do we say that once something is rejected from its particular mitzvah use that it remains forever rejected, or can it go ahead and once again become fit for use? This would seem to indicate to us that even though the hadas was initially rejected because of the berry proliferation, once you remedy that issue, the hadas is fit for use. To which the Gemara says, no, the olam basur da agde, no, that's not the case. The case actually over here is that halacha l'maisa, you're removing the berries after it was already bundled. The kasavar aget hazmana ba'amahu, v'hazmana ba'ama lafklunhu. No, I'm sorry, did I? Oh, I think I started too early. Okay, good. Fine, a little chazara. Wow, really doing yesterday's daf in totality over here. Okay, good. And therefore, again, I'm sorry. Thank you. And the Gemara says, no, rather, what's the case? Basur da agde, you're placing the hadas in after, right? You're removing the berries after it was bundled. The kasara eged hazmana ba'amahu, and the Gemara or the Mishnah is reflecting the view that the act of bundling the hadas is simply hazmana. That's not called mitzvah, that's called preparation for the mitzvah, but that's not the mitzvah itself. The hazmana ba'ama lav klumu. Therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, there's no real dichui. In other words, we'll say we initially looked at the placement of the hadas in the bundle as the beginning of the mitzvah. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily. The placement of the hadas in the bundle is just the dedication or separation or designation of the item for the mitzvah, but not the actual mitzvah itself. Good. Now today's. Remember again, you can't go ahead and diminish the berries on Yom Tiv. So the Gemara says, I have averlikta on Mai. What happens if you did? So you're not supposed to diminish berries on Yom Tiv. Why are you not supposed to diminish berries on Yom Tiv? Rabbi said, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, right across from Tosas Tifshot, where we were supposed to start today. Good. So remember again, you're not supposed to diminish berries on Yom Tiv. Why not? Why not? Tikkun maneh. Tikkun maneh, because it has the appearance that you're fixing something, and of course, again, this is like therefore it's doma l'malacha. So what happens if you did? What happens if you went ahead and you removed the berries on Yom Tiv? So my kosher. Ultimately, again, the Gemara says it's kosher. It's kosher. It's fit for use. To which the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. The ashchar emas. Now remember again, when did the berries become black? Now remember, what the Gemara is pointing out over here, as we said already before, halacha l'maisa says only black berries that are problematic, green berries are not. So when did the berries, literally can mean when did the berries turn black, or when did the black berries appear? Amos. If you want to say that the black berries or the berries turned black yesterday, meaning before Yom Tiv, dichui me'ikarahu. Then Rabbi say, remember again, that means from the time that Sukkah started, those hadassim were already unfit for use. Tifshot mina. So what can you learn from here? Dichui me'ikara delo have dichui. What you could glean from this is that initial rejection does not really create sustained rejection. It's a good formulation. Initial rejection does not create sustained rejection. See, even though the hadas was unfit already from the beginning of Yom Tiv, if you go ahead and remove the berries, which you should not have done, but if you go ahead and remove the berries, ultimately the hadas will be kosher. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe the case over here is what? Maybe the case is where actually the berries turned black or the berries appeared on Yom Tiv itself. Oh, so this is an interesting case. Then what does this become a case of? Nira v'nidchahu. Both say this would then be a case of berries that of a hadas that was fit and then subsequently became unfit. You see what the Gemara is toying with over here? If the case is where the berries, the problematic berries, were already present erev Yom Tiv, then that's a case of dichui me'ikara. Right? The hadas was never kosher. Remember again, because the kashrus of the hadas is only looked at when? Once Yom Tiv starts, right? Whereas what the hadas look like before Yom Tiv, no one cares about. So if we're talking about a case of berries that sprouted already erev Yom Tiv, that means when the hadas, right, Yom Tiv starts, that hadas is rejected from use. Okay, so then if you go ahead and you remove the berries, if we say that the hadas is kosher, that means dichui me'ikara eno dichui. Something that was initially rejected, ultimately, again, does not remain permanently rejected. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe the case is where Yom Tiv started, the hadas was fine. And then what happens? You start right there, then 10 o'clock Yom Tiv morning, you're ready to take your lulav again. What do you discover on your hadassim? What do you discover? Blackberries. Oh, so that would now what the Gemara is saying is what the Gemara said before. And if you went ahead and you took off those blackberries, even though you shouldn't have, what's the status of the hadas? Kosher. What would that teach you? Nira v'nidchohu. That's a case then of a hadas that was fit for use and became rejected. So shamas mina. What can you glean from here? Nira v'nidcha chozer v'nira. Very interesting. So what lesson would you glean from here? Something that was fit, then became rejected. If you rectified it, it could become fit again. Right? Interesting case. To which the Gemara said, maybe not. Maybe not. Let's go back to what we said before. Maybe the berries were already there erev Yom Tiv. Or I should say from the beginning of Yom Tiv. Not necessarily. And dichui meikara de la havi dichui tifshot mina. Aval nira v'nitcha chozer v'nira lo tifshot. So it's possible, the Gemara says, that if we're dealing with a case of where the berries were there from the beginning of Yom Tov, the only thing you could glean from this case is that halacha l'maisa dichui meikara. If something was initially rejected and then you rectify it, it can become fit for use. But that doesn't teach me about the case of nira v'nitcha chozer v'nira. There's something that was fit for use, became unfit for use, and then ultimately becomes fit for use again, that's kosher. In other words, Gemara is just saying you can't necessarily arrive at that conclusion from this particular case. But I'll say I want to point out how interesting this is, right? Because what the Gemara is prepared to say, just think about this for just a moment. What the Gemara is prepared to say is a case of dichui me'ikara eno dichui. There's something that was never fit, and then something that was rejected, then rectified, that could become fit for use. The Gemara says we could learn that out for here. But something that was fit, became rejected, right? And then was rectified again, the Gemara says we can't necessarily glean the fact that that's kosher from here. Even though I think one would have thought intuitively the opposite. Something which was fit for use became rejected, and then was rectified. I would think that item could be more easily kosher versus something which was initially rejected, never fit for use, and then rectified and now put into circulation for use. Right? So just to illustrate with that, with the hadassim, what the Gemara is saying is like this: a hadas that began Yom Tov with blackberries and then had the berries picked off it, the Gemara says is kosher. Why? Because that's dichui me'ikara. It was rejected from the beginning. Now you rectified it. We say dichui me'ikara eno havi dichui. Versus a case of a hadas that at the onset of the Yom Tov was kosher, then sprouted berries, then you remove the berries. So now the Gemara says, well, we can't necessarily glean from here that it's kosher, which is just so interesting, right? Again, I would have thought that nira, v'nitcha, v'nira would have been an easier case to deal with than dichui me'ikara. But if you think about this, by the way, it's also an incredible yisur, like hashkafically, if you think about it, that sometimes the hardest thing in life is not necessarily starting new. The hardest thing in life is having started, failed, and then having to get yourself back up again. Right? You hear that? So like, dichui me'ikara, sometimes in life I realize, like, you know what, I'm nidcha. What I'm doing is not right. What I'm doing is, so I understand it. So I have to go ahead and engage in course correcting activity. And the beautiful thing, like we saw in yesterday's daf, dichui me'ikara eno dichui. Baruch Hashem, that's wonderful for Hilchos Hadassim and also wonderful for Hilchos Tshuva. Right? Even if I was doing the wrong thing, if I engage in course correcting activity, I'm not puzzled for the rest of my life. But sometimes, I begin something, right? So I was nira, I was fit, I was doing the right thing. Then, nidcha, something happens, and I just totally lose my way. The ability to pick yourself up in the aftermath of failure, when you tried to go ahead and engage in the course correcting activity, that's so hard. That's so hard. Because I know what success looked like, and then I failed, and now to pick myself back up and start again, or maybe start differently, that's the case of nira v'nidcha chozer v'nira. To which the Gemara says, is that kosher? Depends on you. Not so pashut. It's kosher if you could pull it off, but not everybody could pull it off. Incredible yisod. The Gemara says weiter. Tan Rabbanan in mematin b'yamtiv. This is why we don't finish the daf. Tan Rabbanan in mematin b'yamtiv. You cannot go ahead and diminish the berries on Yom Tov. Mishra Belazar B'Rishon Amru Mematin. Rabbi Belazar B'Rishon said, no, you can remove the berries. How can you remove the berries? V'halkam etakin mana b'Yom Tov. Both say this is the problem. Berry removal on Yom Tov represents tikkun mana. Tikkun mana means fixing something. Fixing something is doma l'melacha. So Amr Avashi kigon shalaktan la'achila. Oh no, what's the case? The case is where halacha l'maisa. Why are you picking the berries? You want to eat them. Oh, okay. So remember again, ochel nefesh is mutter on Yom Tiv. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar b'Shimon Sabala kavu adamar davar shein miskavin mutter. And ultimately, but 1 second. So you want to eat the berries. That's very nice. But in the process of eating the berries, what happens? You rectify, right? You quote unquote fix the hadas. Not a problem. Rabbi Elazar b'Shimon holds like his father, holds like Rabbi Shimon, who says davar shein miskavin is mutter. Right? That if you do something on Shabbos or Yom Tov and it is an unintended malacha, ultimately, again, it's not a problem. To which the Gemara says, that's fine. So also back to our Shabbos days. Even Reb Shimon, who says that a davar she'eino miskaven is mutter will agree in a psik reisha. We'll say, what's a psik reisha? So psik reisha, remember again, the term is literally cutting off the head. Popular children's toy, Bismana Gemara was chicken head, right? So let's say again, I would like to give my child, it's always good to reward good behavior with the chicken head, right? So I want to go ahead and reward my child with the chicken head, and I want to give it to them on Shabbos. Only one problem, you really can't get the head without killing the chicken. That's called a psik reisha, an act which will inevitably result, which will definitely result in the commission of a malacha. Even Rabbi Shimon, who holds that halacha l'maisa davar she'eino miskaven is mutter, will agree that if it's a psik reisha, it's definitely going to occur. You can't do it on Shabbos or Yom Tiv. To which the Gemara says, so therefore, it's very nice you want to eat the berries. That's great. But at the end of the day, pulling the berries off the hadas is a psik reisha, right? At the end of the day, halacha l'maisa, you are going ahead and definitely changing the status of the hadas. Hachamar askinon, what's the case? The Isle Hoshana Achrisi. Interesting. The case we're dealing with over here is you have another hadas. Meaning you happen to have another kosher hadas. You don't need the hadas with the berries for your kosher hadas. You have a kosher hadas. It's just so therefore all you want to do is go ahead and what? Eat the berries off this hadas. So we don't look at that as a psik reisha, because at the end of the day you don't need this hadas in order to fulfill your mitzvah. Interesting answer. To which the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, Hutter Agdo B'Yamtiv, new discussion. Hutter Agdo B'Yamtiv. If you went ahead. So we'll say, by the way, that's how you pass in halacha l'maisa. You should not go ahead and remove the berries on Yom Tiv, but if you did remove the berries, halacha l'maisa, the hadas is kosher. That's how Shulchan Aruch paskins. New case. Tan Rabbanan, Hutter Agdo B'Yamtiv. We'll say, so again, let's say you went ahead, you bound your lulav. And again, I'll hopefully show you today in the Shulchan Aruch, the halacha regarding binding of the lulav, whether or not it's a mitzvah. You bound your lulav, and what happens? The binding came apart on Yom Tiv. So what do? The Gemara says, Ogdo ka'agudo shel yarek. You should go ahead and tie everything together like a bundle of vegetables. Now, what does this mean? If you look at Rashi says, well, actually not yet. The Gemara says, va'amai, which essentially means a loose-fitting bundle. So supposed to say the issue we're getting into over here is the malach of kshira, of kosher. You can't tie a knot, right, or a sustained knot, a lasting knot, on Shabbos or Yom Tiv. So if your bundle becomes undone on Yom Tiv, what should you do? Tie it like a bundle of vegetables. Why don't you just bow it, right? Tie a bow, and that's good enough. To which the Gemara says, Haman Rabbi Hudahi. It's Rabbi Huda, the Amar Aniva Kshira Ma'al Yasi. Rabbi Huda is actually of the opinion that tying a bow, interestingly enough, is a form of tying, is a form of kosher. Rabbi Huda holds that a bow has enough of a degree of permanence which would make it usher to do on Shabbos or Yom Tiv. Well, one second. Rabbi Huda, Agad Ma'al Yasabai. Once again, if it's Rabbi Huda, but remember again, Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, right, any lulav that is not agud is pasul. So according to Rabbi Huda, you need a real binding of the species over here. To which the Gemara says, Haitana, the Tana of our Mishnah, Savar le kavase bechada, upalegale bechada. Our Tana holds like Rabbi Huda in one area, but there's a use of them in the other. Holds like him that Allah Chalamaisa, a bow is considered to be a knot, but doesn't hold like him, whereas Rabbi Huda holds that Allah Chalamaisa, the Dalid minim must be bound. Our Tana does not hold they must be bound. So we'll say, so just a word on this very quickly. How do we pass in this area regarding lulav tzarich agud, lulav enot tzarich agud? So just to show you this quickly, the Shulchan Aruch says as follows. I'm sorry. It was Tafresh Nun Aleph Aleph. Very, very, very quickly. Okay, so listen to this. So the Shulchan Aruch says there's actually a lot to do. I'm giving you this Mara Makom because it actually is an interesting sifra Shulchan Aruch for you to look up. Taf Reish Nun Aleph Aleph. Mitzvahs Daled Minim. Sheyitel Kol Echad Lulav Echad Beis Aravas Gimel Adasim Umitzvah La'agdam Bekesher Gamar. Shulchan Aruch paskins, it is a mitzvah to go ahead and bind everything together. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, "Da'af tekayim alon de'ein mechuyev la'agdam Al kol panim mitzvah yesh ba zeh mishum zeh keli v'andeu. There is no obligation to bind everything together, but it is a mitzvah of hiddur. It's considered to be hiddur mitzvah to bind everything together. So that means when he says zekeli v'andeu. So that's how you pass halacha l'maisa. You don't, which is very important, which tells you that technically speaking, if you just you have to take everything together. So if you took your lulav, your adas, and your aravas, you just held everything in your hand, one hand, and the esrog in the other hand, are you yotzei? Absolutely. But hiddur mitzvah really says that you should bind them together in a more formal fashion. Now the Shulchan Aruch goes on to discuss what the nature of that binding should actually look like. Again, we don't have time to get into it now, but Taf Reish Nun Aleph Sif Aleph. Incredible. Mishnah. Hadas. No, sorry, wrong Mishnah. Ooh, second time today. Good. Mishnah, Arava. Right? Now we'll start getting into Aravas. So, right, our willow branches. Arava Gezula v'Yevesha Psula. If you have a stolen Arava, you have a dried out Arava, it's possible. Shal Asherah v'Shal Iran. That's what we'll say. It's the same model of the Mishnah. An Arava of an Asherah tree, an Arava of a city which is condemned because everyone worshipped idolatry. Psula. Ultimately, against such Arava will be possible. Miktam Rosha. If the top of the arava was snipped off, nifritzu alav, if the leaves of the arava fell off, vatzaftzfa. Tzaftzfa, Rabbi, we're going to see, is a different species of arava. Atzaftzfa psula. So I will say these are all right. So whether the top was snipped off, the leaves fell off, or you substituted a regular arava and used the tzaftzfa arava, it's possible. Kmusha, if it's withered, vishanasha mixas aleha, or some of the leaves fell off. The shel baal. Now shel baal is an interesting case. Rashi says over here, shel baal or baal, karka shenetzricha lahashkos. So we'll say baal, right? A sedei baal is a field which relies on rainwater, not irrigation. So remember again what the Mishnah is saying over here is if you went ahead and you got an arava from a non-irrigated field, a field that was that is taken care of by rain. So ultimately, again, all of these cases, the arava will be kosher. Now you're going to see the novelty in that is, remember, that the Torah calls aravas arvei nachal. Arvei nachal. One would have thought that perhaps you have to take willow branches only that grow by bodies of water. But if, let's say, it grows in a field, then halacha might say that would not be, because the Mishnah says that's not the case. Good. So we'll say these are all of the halachas of Arava. We're going to see, but interestingly enough, out of all of the Daled Minim, interestingly enough, the Aravas are the least complicated. Aravas are the least complicated. To which the Gemara says as follows: Tanar Abanan. Rabbi said there's an incredible mussar in that if you think about it as well. Right? Remember again, what do the Aravas represent? Right? The mouth. So perhaps there's an incredible yisod as well, which is, the esrog is doma to the lave. It's hard to go ahead and control what you feel, right? The hadassim are doma to the eyes. Again, like we spoke about yesterday, it's hard to sometimes control what you see and how you see things in this world. The lulav is doma to the shedra, to the spine. It's hard in life to figure out what should you stand up for, what shouldn't you stand up for. But you know what sometimes the easiest thing in life is? To control your mouth. That when should I speak? When shouldn't I speak? What should I say? What shouldn't I say? What words should I use? What words shouldn't I use? Out of all the different things to control in life, sometimes the easiest thing to control is your mouth, because you make the active decision. My eyes, I don't necessarily make the active decision to open them or to close them, right? Sometimes they just open and stuff happens. My heart, I can't always necessarily control the flood of emotions that comes in or how I feel. But my mouth, every single time I open it, that is a conscious decision. And every single time I go ahead and I close it, it doesn't see, some people, it looks like their mouths open by themselves, right? It has the appearance based on what they say, how they say it, and the frequency in which they comment. It almost looked like it's an involuntary reaction of speaking. But l'meisa, it's not true. Every single time I talk, that is a conscious decision. So perhaps out of the Daled Minim, the simplest one is the Aravas. Because the easiest thing to control in this world is if you talk, if you don't talk, and when you talk, what you say, what you don't say. Said back to the Gemara. Tanabanan, Arvei Nachal. The Gemara, right, the Torah calls willow branches Arvei Nachal. Hagedelin ala Nachal. Because they grow by a river. That's classically where you find these, which also is interesting because when the Torah says, right, when the Torah says about willow branches, see, I think for many of us, you think about like a willow tree, like a weeping willow, right? Interestingly enough, that's not the paradigmatic example of willow branches, right? Rather, from the Torah's perspective, it's the branches that really grow like in the brush by a river. That's the paradigmatic example. So, Arvei Nachal, Hagidilin al Nachal, Dover Acher, Arvei Nachal, Sha'alo Shalab Mashuch Kinachal. Other possibilities, why does the Torah call Aravas Arvei Nachal? Because the leaf of the Arava is ultimately drawn out, literally mashuch, it's long, just like a river, right? We'll say, if you can imagine in your mind what an Arava, what a willow leaf looks like, it's long and drawn out. Tanya Idach, Arvei Nachal, Inli Ela Arvei Nachal. So I only know in the terms of Arvei Nachal, it only means willow branches that grow by water. Shal Baal v'shal Harim. Minayin, how do you know that you can even go ahead and use aravas that grow in a field or that grow on the mountains? Talmud Lomar Arvei Nachal mikol makom. The Torah doesn't say Arav Nachal; it says Arvei Nachal. Again, Arvei is plural to teach you could really use all kinds of willow branches, no matter where they grow. You're permitted to use them. Top of Lamed Dalet Abba Shol Omer. Abba Shol says, "This is very interesting." Arvei Shtayim. Achas lalula v'achas lamikdash. Abba Shol says, no, we learned something else from Arvei, which is, you have to take two aravas. I will say, but not two aravas in the lulav, two aravas altogether. One arava goes in the lulav, and one arava was used in the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, over here, Abba Shol Omer, Arvei Nachal Domer Kra Lo Lahachsha Shabal Ba, Ela L'Lamdecha, Shetzarech Shtei Mitzvahs Shal Rava. Rashi says like this, there are two different mitzvahs of Arava. What are the two different mitzvahs? Achos la'agda belulav. One mitzvah is to put an Arava into the lulav. The achos lemikdash lahakif is hamizbeach. And about on Sukkah, we're going to discuss this in Hashem in about 10 days from now, 11 days from now, that there is a mitzvah on Sukkah to circle the mizbeach, to do hoshanas. Literally, they would circle the mizbeach with aravos, with a willow branch. So Abba Shol says, Arvei Nachal, the plural teaches me there's a mitzvah of arava vis-a-vis the daled minim, and there's a mitzvah of arava circling the mizbeach. Says in Gemara, Rabbanan the mikdash mnalu. Where did the Rabbanan know that there is a mitzvah to go ahead and circle the mizbeach with an arava? Hilchas Gemiri lahu. They learn it out as a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That the practice of circling the mizbeach on Sukkot with an arava is not learned out from a pasuk, but rather again it is a sana edek la halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Eser Netios. We'll say it's actually incredible. The Gemara is going to make a list of halachos or halachos l'Moshe Sinai. We'll say, get ready for this. There's a halacha called Eser Netios. We'll say again quickly. We're going to do this outside, but you're going to look at this inside later on when you do your chazara. Very quickly, that there we know that in the Shemitah year, this is why this is incredible. In the Shemitah year, farmers actually stop working the land as of Rosh Chodesh Elul. Isn't this incredible? Learning this halacha now. As of Rosh Chodesh Elul, farmers stop working the land. There is an exception to this rule, that if you have 10 saplings that are within a base sa'ah, which is 50 amas by 50 amas, you are allowed to work that area up until Rosh Hashanah. Because the reason for that is if you don't work that area already as of Rosh Chodesh Elul, ultimately, again, what's going to happen? You're going to suffer a significant loss. So again, Chazal backed up the Isser Shemitah. They learned out of Hosafa, right? There's a mitzvah of Tosefah Shemitah, and therefore stopped the farmer from working already Chodesh Elul. But Asar Netios is the halacha that says if you have 10 saplings within a base of 50 amas by 50 amas, you continue to work that area up until Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, Esher Netios, Arava, the obligation to go ahead and take an Arava around the Mizbeach. Niso Chamayim, which is the water libation, which we'll discuss as well. The pouring of the water on the Mizbeach on Sukkis, Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. These are all halachos l'Moshe Sinai. So I say, interestingly enough, so Abba Shol, it's fascinating. Abba Shol learns out the mitzvah to walk around the Mizbeach with an Arava on Sukkis. He learns it out from the plural of Arvei Nachal. The Rabbanan say no, it's halacha l'Moshe misinai. Beautiful. Tan Rabbanan, arvei nachal hagdelos ala nachal. So when you say arvei nachal, so we'll say, here's the interesting question. So if at the end of the day, you actually don't need a willow branch which grows by the water, right? You could take it from wherever it grows, then what? Then what's the obvious shayla? Or the not so obvious shayla, right? Why do you call it arvei nachal? Or so why use that term? Why use that term? Because that term is a shtickle misleading. Whereas if I don't need it to grow by the water, then why call it arvei nachal? To which the answer, I'll tell you why. Prat l'tzavtzifa hagedela ben arim. It's there in order to go ahead and dafka exclude the case of the tzavtzifa. You know what? So we're going to discuss tzavtzifa is in the willow, we'll call it the willow family, but you cannot use it for the mitzvah of daled minim. So arvei nachal comes to exclude the tzavtzifa, which grows in the mountains. Now, what I want to point out is the fact that the tzavtzifa grows in the mountains is not what disqualifies it. We're going to see what disqualifies the tzavtzifa is that the leaves are rounded. You know, the tzavtzifa looks almost like a little bit more like ivy. That's really what, if you could imagine what ivy looks like, it looks a little bit more like ivy, right? The leaf itself is a bit more rounded. The stalk, we're going to see, the Gemara is going to go through this, but it comes to exclude tzavtzifa. So the Gemara said, listen to this. Rabbi Zera Maikra, what's the pasuk that tells us that tzavtzifa is considered to be a more inferior item than the arava? Boss, isn't that beautiful this is? The Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yechezkel. I mean, it's not well, you'll see. The pasuk says as follows: Kach al mayim rabim tzavtzifa samo. It's Chalish Baruch who says essentially to the Navi Yechezkel, Kach al mayim rabim. Essentially, I wanted to make Klal Yisrael like that grows upon abundant water. And instead, they made themselves like a tzavtzifa. So the Gemara's understanding over here is as follows. Chalish Baruch says essentially, I wanted to make Klal Yisrael like an arava, something planted by an incredible amount of water. And instead, they made themselves like a tzavtzifa, something that doesn't grow by water. So the Gemara says, well, we'll see what the drasha means in just a moment. Amarle Abaye. So what you see from that is that tzavtzifa is considered to be inferior to arava. Amarle Abaye v'dilma parusha kamefarish. But maybe at the end of the day, it's the pasuk is coming to explain what's that item that grows on great amounts of water. Tzavtzifa. To which the Gemara says, no. Imkain my samo. If that's the case, then why does the pasuk say samo? They made themselves. They made themselves like a tzavtzifa. Amr Rabbi Yava, Amr Chalish Baruch Hu, Chalish Baruch Hu saying to Yechezkel, Ani amarti shehu Yisrael lefanai kikach al mayim rabim. I wanted Klal Yisrael to be like an arava that grows by great amounts of water. Umaynihu, what is that? An arava, vehein samu atzmon kitzavtzifa shebaharim. And they made themselves like a tzavtzifa in the mountains. I will say such an incredible drasha. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, what does that mean? Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make us like an arava that grows by water. We made ourselves like a tzavtzifa. So I will say, the Ribono Shel Olam gives us so many resources to accomplish great things. Resources that sometimes we don't even recognize. Sometimes those resources could be material. But remember again, mayim, water in general, is always a metaphor for Torah, for Ruchnius. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us so many spiritual resources. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, literally, I flooded them with resources. And for some reason, they just choose to live on a barren hilltop. People say, what an incredible yisod. You see, it's so amazing that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving Musar to Klal Yisrael, the Musar is not like, you're Ovid Avodah Zarah, you're Mechal Shabbos, you're Ochel and the Velas of Trefos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know what the greatest Musar HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us is? I give you all the resources in the world. I give you all the resources. I give you all the mayim you need in order to be successful. And yet, you choose to sit on a barren hilltop. Say, what an incredible Musar. I have all the resources, and it's true, each and every one of us, this is MS. I have all the mayim. I might not have all the money I want, but I have all the mayim. All the necessary spiritual resources I need in order to be successful. Yet sometimes, because of my life decisions, because of my lifestyle decisions, because of my attitudinal decisions, I make the choice to remove myself from the mayim and plant myself. Attitudinal, it's a word. Right? And I plant myself on a barren mountaintop. Such an incredible yisod. So the Gemara says, others go ahead and explain this pasuk based on the Mishnah. Listen to this. Ultimately, again, Navi says, samo. Maskiv Rabbi Zera. Both say this is just the same discussion, just framed in a little bit of a different way. Maskiv Rabbi Zera, V'dom Perush Chamefarish. Maybe the pasuk is to be read as follows: that HaKadosh Baruch Hu planted them by great waters. And what's an example of something planted by a great amount of water? Tzaf Tzifa. What is it that I planted by great waters? To which the Gemara says again, Imkain mas samu. Both say the word samu means they placed themselves somewhere else. I wanted Klal Yisrael to be like a plant which is planted by great amounts of water. Umaynihu arava. Chaya Gittel says, my intention for Klal Yisrael was that there should be an arava. V'heim samu atzman kitzaftzfa shebaharim. Yet they made themselves like the tzaftzfa on the mountain. So we'll say, so again, you see from here that tzaftzfa is considered to be an inferior plant ultimately to arvei nachal, and therefore arvei nachal comes to exclude the use of tzaftzfa. To which the Gemara now says, Tan Rabbanan, Eizu arava, Vezu tzaftzfa. Okay, so now we go ahead and we get into it. Okay, so now tell me what the difference is. Arava, chana shela adam, va'ala shela mashach. So an arava, as Rabbi says, is the kosher species. So again, arava, chana shela adam. So first of all, the stalk is red. Va'ala shela mashach, and the leaf is elongated, right? Upia chalak, the sides of the arava, right, the edges of the arava are smooth. Tzaftzaf, on the other hand, kana shala lavan, the stalk is white. Allah shala agul, its leaf is often round. Now, round doesn't mean like literally round. It means it's rounded. Upiha doma magal, and its sides are like a saw. In other words, that it has like teeth on the sides. A saw. Sorry, thank you. It's like a magal is a saw. I have a hot tanya doma magal kasher. What's that? We learned that if an arava ultimately has like a little bit of like a serration on the side, like a saw, that is kosher. Domet lemasser pasel. It means, I'm sorry, I keep saying magal is a sickle, right? Magal is a sickle. So again, if it has teeth like a sickle, then ultimately it's kosher. If it has teeth like a saw, it's pasel. Rashi points out, have you ever seen the teeth of a sickle, teeth of a saw? Teeth of a sickle are pointed backwards. In other words, they're slanted towards the handle of the sickle. Whereas the saw, the teeth themselves of the saw are pointed downwards. So if the arava has like teeth or a serration like a sickle, they're pointed backwards towards the base of the arava, it's going to be kosher. Like a saw, it's going to be possible. Good. Amar Abayi, Kitanya hi bechilfa gila. Abayi said this discussion, by the way, concerns a particular type of arava known as chilfa gila. Okay, this was the name of the particular type of Rashi says over here, chilfa arafta. It's the third wide line in the wide lines of Rashi. Lav hainu chilfa gila ela tzafzafa va'achshav nishtanish ma'v'koron la'arav. Fine. So the Gemara says as follows. So chilfa gila. Amar Abayi shmamina. Hai chilfa gila kasher loshana. You see from here that the chilfa gila species of arava is fit for use. To which the Gemara says pshita. What's the chiddush? You might have thought that since it's called something other than arava, right? This arava is called chilfa gila. So you might have thought that because it's not called arava, it's called chilfa gila, therefore it's not usable. To which the Gemara says, kamashram, that's not the case. Even though it has a nickname and it's often known by a different name, it's still kosher for use. Maybe that's true. Maybe because it is known by another name, it's not fit for use. To which the Gemara says, Arvei nachal amrachmana mikol makom. We come back to the plurality. And yes, Dovid, that is a word as well, right? We come back to the plurality of it to say that Arvei nachal ultimately again comes to include other items as well. So we'll say this is interesting. So really, which is the havamina is if something is known by another name, that perhaps it would not be usable. Kamash malan, as long as it satisfies the criteria. Ultimately, again, it is fit for use. Incredible. Amar Rav Chisda. But say, this is an incredible Gemara here. Nothing to do with our topic, except now that we mentioned that there are certain items known by different names, the Gemara brings up this fascinating topic. Amar Rav Chisda. Hani tlas mili ishtani shmayo michichara beis hamikdash. These three things, their names were changed when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Now, I'll say, so just to talk about this for just a moment, what does this mean that names were changed when the Beis Hamikdash. Say somebody brought this up. I don't remember who asked this question, but like when we were learning Yuma. So, we were talking about that certain machloksim about the avoda of Yom Kippur. Some of these machloksim occurred not so long after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So how could it be that I understand now, like today, if we were to have machloksim, what happened in the Beis Hamikdash? Okay, we're thousands of years away. But how do you have such fundamentally yisodistic machloksim about what was done in the Mikdash when you could potentially be less than a century away, right? So we'll say, so remember, Rabbi Silber writes about this, actually a very profound idea, which is the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash was an existential trauma to Klal Yisrael. And when a person undergoes trauma could alter the senses, right? Trauma could alter perceptions. Trauma could have a tremendous effect on people in ways that we never thought it would. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it was not simply the loss of a building, loss of a structure. It was the loss of a way of life. It was the loss of communities. It was a staggering loss of life to the point that there was a traumatic effect on Klal Yisrael. And when you undergo trauma, right, a person could forget things. When you undergo trauma, your perception of reality could be altered. When you undergo trauma, things you called one thing before the trauma are called differently after the trauma. So it's an incredible yisod, and gives a little bit of a window into the nature of the traumatic experience of the Churban. So the Gemara says over here, 3 things. Now, the truth is there are more than 3 things. It's just 3 things listed here. 3 things listed here whose names were changed in the aftermath of the Churban. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Number 1, Chalafta Arafta, Arafta Chalafta. So that which used to be called Chalafta, right, became the Arava, and that which was called the Arava became the Chalafta. Now the truth is, Chilfa, as Rashi calls it Chilfa, is actually Tzaftzava. So what the Gemara means is that originally the Arava was called the Arava, the Tzaftzava was called the Tzaftzava. After the Churban, the Arava was called Tzaftzava, the Tzaftzava was called Arava. My nafkamina, who cares? Well, actually we care a lot. Why? My nafkamina, lelulav. Because I remember again, it's very important to keep track as to which of these items is really the Tzaftzava, which is items really the Arava. Why? Arava's kasher, Tzaftzava is pasul. Another example, Shipura chatzotz rasa shipura. Both say that which there used to be a trumpet and a shofar, right? So a trumpet, by the way, doesn't necessarily even have to be something that is long and metallic. It just refers to something that is straight and long, versus a shofar which is bent. So in the beginning, what we call the shofar was called the shofar, right? Ultimately, again, what was called the chatzotzos was called the chatzotzos. After the Churban, the names were switched up. So the Gemara says, "My nafkamina, what does it matter? The shofar shel Rosh Hashanah." Oh, it makes a very big difference. Ultimately, again, Rashi says, "Rechatzotzra is pshuta, it's straight, ve'ina shel ayo." And ultimately, again, it's not of a ram. So a shofar was a bent horn that came from a ram. A chatzotzros was a straight horn that did not come from a ram. So before the Churban, the shofar was the shofar, chatzotzros was chatzotzros. After the Churban, chatzotzros, right, shofar was called chatzotzros, and chatzotzros were called shofar. We'll say, why is this one very intriguing? Why? Because interestingly enough, this seems to have been corrected. Right? Because today, what we call, right, this is not true for today. Today, what do we call a shofar? Right? A shofar. Right? Usually when we refer to a shofar, we're actually, what comes to mind is the shofar Rosh Hashanah, which is kafaf, bend, and it comes from an ayil. So I'll say, what do you see from here? An incredible Musar Haskell, which is, you can heal from trauma. You can heal from trauma. It may take a very long time, and it could be an arduous journey, very difficult. But the ability to heal from trauma is present. V'haraya, there was trauma in the aftermath of the Churban, names got mixed up, and you see, when did it happen? I don't know, right? And sometimes it could take 1,000 years to heal from trauma, right? But yet, the ability, and this is such an incredible yesod, because everyone undergoes trauma in life to varying degrees. And sometimes the more severe the trauma, the more sometimes a person will say, I can never heal from this. I can never get over this. Get over is the wrong word. I can never heal from this. Right? But we see from the Gemara that you can. trauma, even terrible trauma, like churban, and we all experience churban in different ways, one could heal, it just may take time. So the Gemara goes weiter. Psurta, psura, psura, psurta. We'll say psura and psurta both mean table. One means a big table and one means a little table. So these got mixed up. What does it matter? It matters a lot, because if you're in the market to buy a psura, which is a small table, but instead you get sold the psurta, you're going to be a little bit upset. So therefore, to know which term means what is very important for commerce purposes. Good. Amrabai afani omer bekasi hovlila bekasi. We'll say these refer to different stomachs of an animal. These terms got mixed up. What does it matter? Both say it matters. Why? Because if you find a needle in certain stomachs, right, certain stomachs of the animal, it causes it to be a treifa, but yet in other stomachs it does not. So it's very important to know what is called what. Good. Amar Rav Amar Yosef Afani Omer Bavel Bursif. Bursif Bavel. This is very interesting. Another interesting mix-up over here is actually a geographic mix-up. That originally Bavel was called Bavel, Bursif was called Bursif. After the Churban, Bavel was called Bavel, right? Bursif was called Bavel, and Bavel was called Bursif. Okay, Lemay Nafkamina. So what does it matter? Amud Beis. What does this matter? Legite Nashim. It actually makes a very big difference for Gittin. Then I will say, so like when you read this, so the most natural thing, why does it make a difference for Gittin? I think there's a Gittin. Because ultimately why? What do you have to write in a get? Location. But here's what's interesting. That's not what Rashi says, because at the end of the day, if you have a place that becomes known by a new name, then let's say for example, let's say, okay, Baltimore is called Baltimore. Let's say they officially changed the name to worst crime in the United States. It doesn't roll off the tongue as well. But let's say they officially changed the name to that. So in a get, that's the name that you would use. That's the name that you would use ultimately again for the city. So that's not the issue. Also, this is actually interesting. And for Gittin, for a little bit of a chazar from last cycle. Look at Rashi. Legite nashim. Rashi says the kaimalon hamevi get michutz laaretz sarach shiomar befanai nechtav or befanai nechtav. I will say opening Mishnah Maseches Gittin. If you bring a get from outside of Eretz Yisrael, right, you have to say befanai nechtav, befanai nechtam. This get was written and signed in front of me. And again, the Gemara explains why. Because halacha l'maisa, there was a concern that outside of Eretz Yisrael, people did not know how to write a get lishma. Right? A get must be written for this particular couple. So b'fanei nechtam was the way that the shaliach testified that the get was written lishma. Well, interestingly enough, not in Eretz Yisrael they knew how to do a get lishma, and in Bavel they knew how to do a get lishma. So if you were bringing a get in Eretz Yisrael, you didn't have to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. And ultimately, again, in Bavel, you also didn't have to say, or if you were bringing a get from Bavel. But Bursif was a neighboring country to Bavel, a neighboring place to Bavel. And if you were bringing a get from Bursif, you did have to say b'fanei nechtav, b'fanei nechtam. Therefore, again, to know that the names got messed up. Right, and therefore halacha l'maisa to know where you need the testimony of b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam. Incredible. We'll say Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel Omer. We'll say top of Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Rabbi Shmuel says, listen to this. Shlosha adasim shtei aravas lulav echad ve'esrog echad. Rabbi Shmuel says, here's what you need. Here's the Sukkah inventory. Here's what you need. You need 3 adasim, 2 aravas, 1 lulav, and 1 esrog. That's all. Afilu shnayim kitumim ve'echad eno katum. And by the way, by the 3 hadasim, even if 2 of the kitumim also means cut or snipped, right? Even if two of them are snipped, right? And one is not, one is whole ve'echad eno katum, it's kosher. All right, so Rose, that's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel is saying 2 things. Number 1, 1 lulav, 3 hadasim, 2 arabas, 1 esrog. 1 esrog, but by the hadas and the 3, even if 2 of the hadas branches are clipped, right? So all you have is 1 complete hadas branch. Ultimately, again, that is going to be enough. Rabbi Tarfon says, "Afilu shloshtan kitumim." It's interesting. Rabbi Tarfon says, even if all 3 of the branches are snipped, ultimately, again, the hadas will still be kosher. Rabbi Kiva says, no. Again, we'll explain this machlokes. Now, we'll say Rashi already points out that the reason Rabbi Tarfon allows you to use snipped hadassim or cut hadassim is because he does not believe that the requirement of hadar applies to a hadas. Right? So if you don't require hadar for it to be beautiful, even if it's snipped, it's going to be kosher. Rabbi Akiva says, this is very interesting, Kishem shalulav echad, ve'esrag echad, kach hadas echad, ve'arava achas. So Rabbi Akiva says, all you need is one of each. Same way there's one lulav, there's one esrog, all you need is one hadas and one arava as well. Quite interesting. So the Gemara said, Tanya, Rabbi Shmuel says, pre-eitz hadar echad. So we'll say, now remember, Rabbi Shmuel is the first opinion in the Mishnah. So pre-eitz hadar, one esrog, right? Pre-eitz hadar echad. Kapos tamarim, the phrase kapos tamarim, also echad refers to one lulav. Anaf eitz avos shlosha. Anaf eitz avos, which is hadassim, tells you need 3 hadassim. And both say, where do you get 3? It's very simple. Anaf eitz avos. He dashes ultimately again each of those words to generate. Each word generates a stock liability or obligation. Good. Arvei nachal, which is aravis, again plural. Shtaim, ultimately again is 2. So the Gemara says. Now, we'll say, so, right, so I just on this drasha, because I know what you're thinking, meaning, 1 second, if you're dashing number of words, pre-eitz hadar, right, there's also 3. Kapos, so remember again, it's also based on how the words translate, right? That again, for example, anaf eitz avos, so there is certain repetition in those words. Again, we'll see this all when we get to the sugi of esrog as well. But let's first do the drasha. So the drasha of Rabbi Shmuel is, pre-eitz hadar, 1 esrog. Kapos, tamarim, 1 arav, 1 lulav. Anaf eitz avos, 3 hadassim. Arvei nachal, 2 aravis. So the Gemara says, "Va'afilu shnayim kitum ve'echad she'eno katum." Furthermore, Rabbi Shmuel said, even if 2 of the hadassim stalks are snipped and 1 is not, ultimately again it'll still be kosher. Rabbi Tarfon says, "Shlosha va'afilu shlosha kitum." Rabbi Tarfon will agree. He will agree with Rabbi Shmuel. Right? Both Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Tarfon agree that halacha l'maisa you need 3 hadas branches. However, again, whereas Rabbi Shmuel says 2 out of the 3 could be snipped. Rabbi Tarfon says all 3 could be snipped. Rabbi Akiva Omer Kishim Shalulav Echad Ve'esrog Echad. Rabbi Akiva will say the same way that there's 1 lulav and there's 1 esrog. Kach hadas echad ve'arava echad. So too there's 1 hadas and there's 1 arava. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer Yochol Yehei Esrog Iman Ba'aguda Achad. So we'll say, now watch this. Rabbi Eliezer says maybe you should have to take you should have to bundle the esrog together with everything else. Let's remember again, the way we're doing things is we're taking the lulav, the hadassim, and the aravas all together. I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, the esrog has to be bundled with those items as well. V'chi ne'emar pre-eitz hadar v'kapos tamarim. Does the Torah say you should take an esrog, vav, and the lulav, which would sound like what? The esrog has to be bundled together with the lulav. Alolo nemar ella kapos tamarim. Right? The pasuk says you should take pre-eitz hadar kapos tamarim. There purposely is no vav. Right? It could have said you should take a pre-eitz hadar v'kapos tamarim and the lulav. And if that's the case, then what? Then Allah, because you also remember again, if you look at the rest of the pasuk says, well, the kaktum lachem b'yom harishon pre-eitz hadar kapos tamarim va'anaf eitz avos va'arvei nachal. See, interestingly enough, you have lulav and hadassim and aravas. It could have easily said an esrog and a lulav, but it doesn't. It doesn't, which indicates to us what? V'alolo nemar ela kapos. Ultimately, you must say, what does it teach me? Therefore, halacha l'maisa, esrog does not have to be bundled, which Rabbi says is really interesting, because you wonder about this, right? If there's a din of igud, and again, even if it's not a chiyuv, but just a mitzvah, if I'm already bundling stuff together, why not put the esrog in there as well? To which the Gemara says, because halacha l'maisa, the formulation is different. The Torah talks about esrog as separate and independent from the rest of the bundle. Nabo said, this is a very interesting halacha. How do you know that these items are ma'akev one another? Nabo say, what does this mean? That halacha l'maisa, let's say, for whatever the reason, you can't get hadassim. you can't get hadasim. So how do I know that if you can't get hadasim, or you can't get arabas, that there's no mitzvah? Right? There's no such thing as a mitzvah to take just take whatever you have, that they're ma'akiv one another. Talmud Lomar, ulekachtem, you shall take them, shetehei lekicha tama. It must be a complete act of taking. And it's only considered to be a complete act of taking if what? If you have all of the species present. Pretty incredible. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi said, let's go back to Rabbi Shmuel. Remember again, Rabbi Shmuel said you need 3 hadasim. But Rabbi Shmuel said what? 2 of the hadasim could be clipped, and 1 of them has to be whole. That makes no sense. Man of shach. Ishlim in boy nami kulu. If you need the hadasim to be complete, then what? All of them should have to be complete. And if you don't need that to be complete, then why do you need 1 out of the 3 to be complete? Let them all be snipped. To which the Gemara says, Amar Bira, Rabbi Ami, Chazer ba Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel ultimately went ahead and retracted his position. Right? The Gemara, look at Rashi, Chazer Rabbi Shmuel, Mitchilas Devarav, Umachshe Bechad, Umir Hadar Bay. Rabbi says, it's interesting that Rabbi Shmuel retracted his position. And what did he say? Rabbi Shmuel says, you don't need 3. He agreed with Rabbi Akiva in the end. You don't need 3. All you need is what? All you need is 1. But that 1 has an obligation of hadar, which means what? It has to be whole. That's the whole. Rabbi Shmuel changed his mind. Originally he said you need 3, but 2 out of the 3 could be snipped. Then he said, no, you really only need 1, but there is a mitzvah of hadar by the hadas, and therefore that 1 must be fully intact. Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, halach Rabbi Tarfon. Ultimately, again, the halacha follows Rabbi Tarfon. And I both say, ultimately, again, Rabbi Tarfon says, all 3 of the hadasim could be snipped. So the Gemara says, Shmuel, which means, I will say, just so you understand what that means. What that means is that halacha l'maisa, there is no mitzvah of hadar by the hadasim. Now again, we'll define that in tomorrow's shir a bit more. But the halacha was Rabbi Tarfon, there is no mitzvah of hadar by hadasim, and therefore hadasim could even be snipped. To which the Gemara says, Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. This was very interesting. Because Shmuel said, Shmuel said to the hadas salesman, to the myrtle branch salesman, and what did he say? Ashvu v'zabinu. Don't overcharge for hadasim. Alright? Don't overcharge for hadasim. Because if you overcharge, right, if you price gouge, dashina l'chuk Rabbi Tarfon. I will give a public shir, and I will say that we paskin like Rabbi Tarfon. Now, why like Rabbi Tarfon? My time, if you want to say because Rabbi Tarfon is the most mekel, well, Rabbi Akiva the mekel tfei. So ultimately, again, that's not necessarily true because Rabbi Akiva ultimately again is even more mekel. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily. I'll tell you why. Because what does Rabbi Tarfon say? As much as Rabbi Tarfon says, you need 3 hadasim, he says, what's the status of those hadasim? What's the status? They can be clipped. You don't need hadar. Look what the Gemara says, I will say. Listen to this. So the Gemara says, the Mekel Tvei, Tlosik tu mishchichi, chad velo katam lo shchiach. It's true, Rabbi Akiva only requires you to have 1 hadas. But what's the nature of that hadas, according to Rabbi Akiva? It has to be complete because Rabbi Akiva holds that there's a din of hadar by the hadas. Rabbi Tarfon, on the other hand, holds you need 3. But he holds that what? They can all be clipped. You don't need hadar. And the Gemara says it's much easier to find 3 clipped hadasim than it is to find 1 whole hadas. So therefore, again, the Gemara says over here that Shmuel said to the salesman, be careful, don't price gouge, because if you try to price gouge, I'll darshan in public that the halacha follows Rabbi Tarfon, and therefore again, even though you need 3 hadasim, you could use clipped hadasim, and again, that will certainly send the price plummeting. So I'll say, again, we'll discuss halacha l'maisa, but I will just point out, b'derech hashkafa, what an interesting statement that is. There's sometimes in life it's easier to go ahead and find 3 clipped hadasim than it is to find 1 fully intact hadas, because sometimes in life, it's a bit easier to go ahead and do things that are good but not great than to do something that is great and perfect. But this is a very important halacha l'maisa, which is that in the eyes of the Ribono Shel Olam, it's so much more important to have 3 clipped hadasim than it is to have 1 perfect hadas. Because if you spend your life looking for the perfect hadas, if you spend your life aiming for perfection, perfection is an elusive and almost unattainable goal. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu never makes that demand of us. But 3 clipped hadasim, as much as they're not perfect, they're beautiful and they're good. Because sometimes, again, if we set our sights on perfection, we're setting ourselves up for failure. But if we set our sights on good, and then ultimately, Emiras Hashem, push good to great, that's attainable and ultimately within reach. All right, so we'll stop over here. Tomorrow, Emiras Hashem, we begin the Sugya of Esrog, which is an incredibly exciting Sugya that'll take us a little while, Emiras Hashem. Coming attractions. Shalom, everyone. What